All right, you should be on Unit 1, Skill 9 for this video. We're going to be doing constructing the altitude, which are basically perpendicular lines or perpendicular heights of triangles. So the essential question is, how is the construction of an altitude different from that of a perpendicular bisector? What is important to remember when constructing altitudes? Okay, so we are going to use the perpendicular bisector construction, but we have an extra step in there that we have to do to ensure that we're making the correct altitude go through the correct point. So altitudes and perpendicular lines through a point. So look at the diagram below. The only perpendicular line you can construct is a perpendicular bisector. Since the perpendicular line must go through point A, what problem arises with using the perpendicular bisector construction, and how can we fix it? So basically, if we look at this picture down here, if I were to take my compass and try to do a perpendicular bisector, but we want the line that we construct to go perfectly through point A, so we basically want a line that's going to go perpendicular to this line drawn in and through point A. Now, if I were to go ahead and just swing some arcs, do your perpendicular bisector construction, how are we going to guarantee that when I connect the line, it's going to go perfectly through point A? Because that's our goal. And you'll see on the next page, when we do this, we want to make an altitude through a specific vertex of a triangle. So we cannot guarantee that the perpendicular bisector line will pass through A, basically if we just guess where those arcs should go. Okay, so if we want to construct a line perpendicular, so we're making those perpendicular lines to the given segment, and it must pass through point A. Our very first step is we want to take our compass and place it on the point that we want the line to go through. And we're going to place our compass center there, and then what we're going to do is we're going to swing an arc such that when we swing it, we want that bottom arc to go through the line in two spots. So you want to adjust your radius hole such that when you swing it, it's going to hit the line on the right and on the left side. Okay, so I'm going to do that first. I call it construct the smiley face arc first. So just go like that so that it hits the bottom line twice. Again, I call it the smiley face arc just because it makes a smile. So once we do that, we place a point at the 2 points of intersection of the arc in the straight line. Now, what I do from here, or what you need to do from here, is we've created our two endpoints that we're going to use now for our perpendicular bisector, because A is now perfectly in between these two endpoints. So if I call these point B and C, A is now in the direct middle of line BC, or segment BC, between these 2 points. So now when I take my compass, I'm going to do the perpendicular bisector with one arc starting at point B and one arc starting at point C. And when I connect the intersection points of the arcs, you'll see that the line goes through A. So remember, our first step for perpendicular bisector is to measure more than halfway across our line segment. So we want to bring our radius hole. Again, if you're doing this construction with the closer radius hole, it needs to stay consistent throughout the construction or else it will not work. So you want to move your compass and adjust it so that it's more than halfway between BC. And then you want to go ahead and swing your first line for your first arc for your perpendicular bisector, starting at B. Then you want to switch it over to point C and swing your other arc up and down so that it hits at the top and at the bottom. And where those two arcs intersect, we're going to go ahead and connect with our compass, and you will see that that line is going to go through point A. Okay, so now what we've done is we've created this perpendicular bisector, but it also goes through A. So it's creating these 90-degree angles in here. And if I call this point here in the center, let's call it, let's see, ABC, let's call this D. If we perpendicular bisected that line, then we know now that BD, from B to D, is congruent to DC, because we just bisected between those two endpoints of that segment. Okay, so there's your perpendicular bisector. It's gone through point A. Now, what was that step that we had to do first? We had to make sure that we swung that smiley face arc first. So step one, we want to make sure that we swing the first smiley arc from point given before the perpendicular bisector. Okay, so that's really important. And we're going to do some altitude questions now, but you're going to write in all the steps at the end, so I don't want to do too much writing on this one. So go ahead and flip on over to the next page. Okay, example number 2. Now we're going to construct an altitude in a shape. So what is an altitude? Let's just kind of make a little note over here. An altitude of a shape is the perpendicular height that connects a vertex to the base of the shape. Okay, so an altitude, I'm going to kind of draw an arrow over there, is the perpendicular height that connects. So if I had a triangle drawn in, the altitude would be that perpendicular height drawn in from any vertex to the base. Okay, so construct an altitude from point A. So we're going to start at point A as our starting point. Okay, to BC. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and highlight BC. So we know that that's the line that we're going to connect to make your altitude. Okay, so step 1 is you want to put your compass on the starting point, which is point A for this one. And then we're going to want to swing our compass so that it intersects line BC at the bottom in 2 spots. Now, what I'm seeing is that mine might not intersect perfectly there on the left side. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to extend this line a little bit out. So I'm going to extend line BC, which is fine as long as it's an extension of the original base. And so now when I swing my arc, I'm going to put it on A, and we're going to swing our first smiley face arc. Once that it hits there, and then on the other side too. Okay, so it hits once here, and my other point on the left side is kind of off the shape, but again, as long as you've extended that line, it's totally fine. Okay, so now that we've done that, we want to go ahead and do the perpendicular bisector between point B, let's call this point E over here. So I'm going to go ahead and so now again, by swinging that first smiley face arc, we've guaranteed that the when I connect to make my perpendicular bisector, it's going to go through A. So let me just make sure my compass radius is set for this one. It looks like it got messed up a little bit. So if your compass ever slides around, you want to make sure that your compass radius is in line with your first arc, and then you can continue with your perpendicular bisector. But for this one, actually, we can adjust it and bring it in a little bit so that we're more than halfway between BE. We could be exactly at E if you would like. It's just going to go up really high and really low. So I'm going to bring mine in a little bit, but you just don't want to be less than halfway because then your arcs will not intersect. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and swing my compass up and down to make my right half of my perpendicular bisector. Put it on point E, swing it up and down to make the left half. And now this time when I connect my top and bottom intersection of those arcs, I'm going to want to extend it so that it goes through point A. So I'm going to line up all 3 dots, A, the top and bottom intersection point, and connect them. Okay, so now if I connect them perfectly, you see they go through point A at the top, which is what our goal was, from A, and it makes a perpendicular line with the base BC. So now if I call this point right here, it's the A, B, C, D, E, F, then if it is the line that is the perpendicular distance from the vertex to the base, then we can say AF is the altitude, and this is a trapezoid, of trapezoid ABCD. Okay? And AF is perpendicular to BC. Okay? All right, so our next one is construct an altitude from P. So P is our starting point here. So we're going to start there. And we want to connect and make an altitude, so again, that perpendicular height, to the point P to the bottom of this triangle. Now, do you see how the bottom of the triangle is way over here? So there's no way that I'm going to make a perpendicular height going from here all the way over there. That's not going to be perpendicular to the base. So I'm going to highlight the base. The base is always the one that's on the bottom of the shape. Okay, so this is your base. But as we can see, if I go to connect, or if I go to swing my first smiley face arc, there's no way I'm going to have it intersect twice, and there's no way I can make that perpendicular to the green line. So my altitude is actually going to be outside of the triangle for this one, and this happens often. The altitude is just the distance from the, the vertex P to the bottom, or the base, so it's this distance right here. So I can't actually do that and intersect the green line. So what I'm going to have to do is, like what I did with the other example, is extend this out a little bit. So extend the base out a little bit. And now we can continue with our first smiley face arc. So we're going to go ahead and take our compass and make our smiley face arc hit the bottom line 2 times. So I've got one intersection point here and one there. Okay, and then I go ahead and continue on with my perpendicular bisector. So by doing this first step, now we've guaranteed P is the midpoint, or in the middle of these 2 points, and now we can continue with our perpendicular bisector. All right, so swing up, swing down. Okay, all right, I've got my top, bottom, line those 3 points up, connect them nicely, and now we've got this line right here. I'm going to do it in pink. Okay, and if I extended, or right here, this line, let's call this intersection point down here Q, is perpendicular, and so that's the perpendicular altitude. So PQ is the altitude to triangle PIR. Okay? All right, so steps for constructing a perpendicular bisector to a given line or an altitude. Step 1, we want to place compass on the vertex that the altitude must pass through. Okay, so it will be given to you. And then step 2 is swing the smiley arc so that it hits the base or the line across from it, across from the vertex, twice. And then step 3 is construct the perpendicular bisector between the 2 intersection points of the smiley arc and the base. Okay, and that will give you the altitude. All right, so go ahead and try some practice.